The most dangerous thing a person can say when they're hurt isn't, "I hate you." It's, "I'm fine," because anger still wants to be heard. Silence doesn't. And that's what makes it so easy to miss. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. Someone disappoints you. Someone breaks a promise. Someone forgets the one thing you hoped they would remember. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. You answer their text. You go to work. You laugh when you're supposed to laugh. From the outside, nothing seems different, but something has changed. You stop sharing things. You stop telling them about your day. You stop sending that random message when something reminds you of them. The connection doesn't explode. It evaporates. And here's the strange part. Most people never notice it's happening. They think relationships end during screaming matches, during dramatic breakups, during one final argument. But many relationships end long before that. The paperwork just comes later. Because when some people get hurt, they don't start a fight. They start a process. A process we'll call the quiet contract. And once you see it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. A friend who suddenly becomes distant. A partner who stops opening up. A family member who seems present but somehow feels miles away. The quiet contract begins with a simple belief. A belief so small you barely notice it. If needing people creates pain, I'll need people less. Not consciously, not dramatically, just a little less trust, a little less vulnerability, a little less hope. Until one day you realize you've emotionally left a room your body is still standing in. But why does this happen? Why do some people get louder when they're hurt, while others disappear into silence? The answer has less to do with personality than most people think, and more to do with history. Think about a child who tries to explain their feelings and gets ignored, or mocked, or punished. Think about someone who repeatedly speaks up in relationships, only to be misunderstood, again and again and again. Eventually the brain learns something, not something true, something useful for survival. Talking doesn't help, and survival lessons are powerful, because the brain doesn't care whether a strategy makes you happy. It only cares whether it keeps you safe. That's why people often carry emotional habits for decades, not because they work, because they once worked. A child learns silence to avoid conflict. An adult keeps the silence long after the danger is gone. A teenager learns not to ask for emotional support. Years later, they still struggle to ask for help. The environment changed, the strategy didn't, and suddenly, silence starts looking less like a personality trait and more like emotional armor. But here's where things get complicated, because silence is one of the most misunderstood signals in human psychology. Most people see silence and assume one of three things. They don't care, they're over it, they've moved on. Yet often the opposite is true. The person who cares the least usually doesn't spend hours replaying conversations. They don't analyze every word. They don't lie awake wondering what they could have done differently. The quiet person often does. The silence isn't coming from a lack of emotion, it's coming from too much emotion. Imagine trying to explain 10 different feelings at the same time. Anger, disappointment, confusion, fear, sadness, hope, resentment, love. Now imagine translating all of that into one conversation. It's overwhelming, so the brain chooses the easier option. Say nothing. But here's the trap. What protects you in the short term can quietly damage you in the long term. Because every time you don't express a hurt feeling, the feeling doesn't disappear. It gets stored. Like putting boxes into an attic. One box isn't a problem, neither are 10. But after years, the entire structure starts to bend under the weight. That's why quiet people sometimes seem fine for months or years, and then suddenly pull away. The withdrawal feels sudden to everyone else. But for them, it was happening the entire time. One disappointment at a time. One unresolved hurt at a time. One unopened box at a time. And then comes the moment nobody expects. Not an explosion, not a breakdown, not a dramatic confrontation, just indifference. The final stage of many emotional wounds isn't anger. It's exhaustion. When someone has explained themselves internally 1,000 times, they eventually stop explaining themselves externally. Not because they don't care, because they're tired. Tired of hoping, tired of repeating themselves, tired of feeling unheard. And that's when people become truly quiet. Not the silence of pain, the silence of surrender. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that silence, you know how confusing it can feel. Because there's no obvious warning sign, no dramatic announcement, no final speech, just less effort, less sharing, less presence, less trying. Until one day you look around and realize the person is still here, but the connection isn't. Now here's the twist most people never consider. The quiet contract isn't really about other people. It's about control. Pain makes people feel powerless, and humans hate feeling powerless. So the mind searches for something it can control. It can't control disappointment. It can't control betrayal. It can't control how others behave, but it can control vulnerability. It can control how much access people get. It can control how much it risks getting hurt again. And that's exactly what the quiet contract promises. If I expect less, I'll hurt less. If I need less, I'll suffer less. If I stay guarded, I'll stay safe. The problem? Safety and connection often want opposite things. The more protected you become, the harder it becomes to be understood. The harder it becomes to feel close to anyone. The harder it becomes to experience the very thing you were trying to protect. Love, trust, belonging. Because every meaningful relationship requires something risky. Emotional exposure. The willingness to be seen. The willingness to be misunderstood sometimes. The willingness to communicate before resentment takes over. And that's difficult, especially for people whose silence once saved them. But here's what changes everything. You don't heal by becoming louder, you heal by becoming more honest. Sometimes honesty sounds like, that hurt me. Sometimes it sounds like, I need help. Sometimes it sounds like, I'm not okay. Simple words, terrifying words, life-changing words. And if you're someone who goes quiet when you're hurt, pay attention to your silence. Not all silence is wisdom. Not all silence is strength. Sometimes silence is simply pain with nowhere to go. And if someone you care about has suddenly become quiet, don't rush to assume they stopped caring. Look closer. Sometimes the loudest cry for understanding is the one that never gets spoken. Because the truth is, people rarely disappear from our lives all at once. First, they disappear from the conversation. Then they disappear from the connection. Then eventually, they disappear from the relationship. And by the time most people notice, the goodbye happened a long time ago.